In many ways, the New England state of Maine shares some wet and wind of Canada's maritime provinces. Although the northern coast of New England remained administered by the colony of Massachusetts until well after the Revolutionary War, the lobsters, fish, and histories of the Gulf of Maine and Bay of Fundy were shared with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. The Revolution and War of 1812 were final deciders of where the British belonged, the colder north. The British earlier, through the French and Indian War, had decided where the French, then known as Acadians, belonged, elsewhere. Newfoundland and Labrador were the early settlement and fishing grounds of Scandinavians. Norse Vikings apparently bumped ashore at the north end of the shoreline there about 1000 AD, roughly 500 years before Chris Columbus and the other Europeans began nosing around the eastern coast of North America. The only archaeological site in the Americas outside of Greenland is called L'Anse aux Meadows, otherwise known to most Americans as Vineland. Sam Champlain's dabbling in the Bay of Fundy and St. Lawrence River region captured the imagination of small groups of French immigrants who settled the fertile tidal marshes surrounding the Bay of Fundy, Acadiens. Small Algonquin-speaking Abenaki tribal groups occupied territory largely in present-day interior Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, while the Mi'kmaq Nation inhabited all of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, eastern New Brunswick, and the southern Gaspé Peninsula. The agrarian Maliseet Nation settled the St. John River and Allagash River valleys of New Brunswick and Maine. The Passamaquoddy Nation inhabited the northwestern coastal regions of the present-day Bay of Fundy. Passamaquoddy Bay today is the name of an inlet of Fundy at the mouth of the St. Croix River, shared by New Brunswick and Maine. John Cabot and Giovanni de Verrazzano probably superficially probed these maritime waters during their voyages of discovery for England and France. But it was French explorer Jacques Cartier who made the first detailed reconnaissance and declared the region for the King of France. Later, the explorer-cartographer Samuel de Champlain established the second permanent European settlement in North America, following Spain's settlement at St. Augustine, Florida. At the St. Croix Island, later moved to Port Royal, or Annapolis Royal. These folks were the Acadiens, later expelled during several conflicts with Englishers. For instance, Virginian raiders in 1613 captured Point Royal, and in 1621 France ceded Acadia to Scotland's Sir William Alexander, who renamed it Nova Scotia. Some English settlements were established along the coast of Maine in the 1620s, although the climate and conflict with the local indigenous people chased the trespassers away. Only about a half dozen European settlements had survived the 17th century. New England, further south and west, was allied with the Iroquois Confederacy, based around the southern Great Lakes and west of the Hudson River. Acadian settlers allied with the Wabanaki Confederacy. The British began actual expulsion of the Acadians from Nova Scotia with the Bay of Fundy campaign in 1775. More than 12,000 Acadians of 15,000 total French settlers were evicted over a decade or so. The New Brunswick shores had witnessed the settling of large numbers of Loyalist refugees in the St. John area, more than 30,000 where there had been only about 17,000 settlers already there. The colony of Nova Scotia later was split off in 1784. At the same time, another part of the colony of Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, was split off to become the colony of Cape Breton Island. The colony of St. John's Island was renamed to Prince Edward Island in 1798.
In examining the history of the early navigators, we must also have in mind the accidents and errors occasioned by the fogs. It is possible that such a large and broad water as the Bay of Fundy for a long time was not depicted on official maps of the European kings because their official explorer at the time of his arrival could not recognize it from such a bank of fog being stretched out like a range of mountains before its entrance. Sir James Ross in the Lancaster Sound believed he saw mountains where there were but fogs, and depicted this sound as landlocked, whilst it had the widest open water in the world.
As one 19th century author put it,
if we unite the Bay of Fundy with its two interior branches and the Gulf of Maine, taking them as a whole, we may say that the entire piece of water in its configuration is very much like the figure of a colossal turnip, with a broad head, a small body, and two thin roots.
the St. John River flows more than 400 miles from northern Maine into New Brunswick, emptying into the Atlantic Ocean in the Bay of Fundy. Eastern Canada's longest river, its drainage basin is one of the largest on the east coast at about 21,000 square miles. A part of the border between New Brunswick and Maine follows 80 miles of the river. A tributary forms part of the border between Quebec and Maine. Champlain visited the mouth of the river on the feast day of John the Baptist in 1604 and renamed it the Rivière Saint-Jean. British occupied a portion of coastal Maine during the War of 1812 and captured the USS Chesapeake, an American frigate, in Halifax. During the war, the largely undefended eastern Maine was occupied by British, with rumors that they intended to spin the area into a Canadian colony of New Ireland. A peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, ended the campaigns of Britain and restored pre-war boundaries. Maine stayed a part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts until 1820, when it voted to secede. Under the Missouri Compromise of 1820, it was admitted to the Union. as the 23rd state. Portland originally was the state's capital, but later Augusta in the interior became the compromised seat of government of all the populace. Shipbuilding, fishing, whaling, and coastal trading emanated out of Maine's inlets, while lumbering and mining demanded the attention of inhabitants in the rugged interior. Ironically, as the frontier migrations materialized, numerous Mainers hiked west and settled in the Northwest Territory that today are Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. Kennebunkport on the southern shore of Maine and Bar Harbor in the north are today major tourist destinations. Like snow geese, Eastern Americans flock to Florida in the winter and shift to Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Maine in the summer. Many islands encircle Maine's inlets and bays. Monhegan Island is about 10 miles offshore and one of the wildest. Its small town does not abide vehicles and trades in lobsters and fish. A meteorologist years ago gave a weather update stating that, quote, "It's a windy day across the state of Maine. All you people on Monhegan Island, hold on." Near the Massachusetts border, Cape Porpoise was incorporated in 1653, but early white settlers were driven away by Indian raids. The place was reorganized under the name Arundel in 1718 in honor of the Earl of Arundel. In 1821, its name was changed to Kennebunkport. Kennebunkport was also the summer home of former U.S. President George H.W. Bush. Father of former U.S. President George W. Bush, located on Walker Point, or Vesuvius Point, its former name. The rambling compound had been owned by the Bush family since the early 1980s. The Bush's ancestry is distinct from the Walker family that settled York County, Maine. Some of this family's Walker relatives are buried in the nearby cemeteries.